Hey guys, how's it going? It's Al. Week 15 on DraftKings is here, and I've got an NFL DFS lineup builder show just for you where I'm going to talk with my Twitch chat for the next 45 minutes to an hour, trying to break down the ways that we want to attack this slate. I'm not just sitting here talking about these are my top 10 quarterbacks, these are my top 10 running backs, these are my top 10 wide receivers. If you want the players that I talk about the most on ESPN, I write a Best Buys column every single week. It's out there. Just go to the Google machine and type Best Buys Week 15. Those 4 words will give you, my article will be the top link thing there. It's an ESPN Plus article. If you have a subscription to ESPN the magazine or had one, if you have a Disney Plus subscription, with probably most people have at this point, more rather than not, you have access to that article. It's the only thing that I do that's behind a paywall, really, and that's because ESPN wants it behind the paywall. This kind of is what it is. You want to go read that article? I detail like 4 or 5 plays at every single position with my reasoning why, and that's out every single Thursday. It's already out for this week. You've heard me on different podcasts like the Daily Fantasy Edge podcast or the 06010 Fantasy Focus podcast for ESPN, where we talk about specific plays. This show is more about strategy and how we're going to attack a slate. Mostly because on Friday, we don't have all the information. If you've played poker before, you understand that that's a game of partial information, where if you're the person that's under the gun, you have less information than the person that's on the button, right? So the more information we have, the more informed decisions we can make. And the most informed that we're going to get about any NFL slate is right before lock, after inactives have come out 90 minutes before the slate is going to lock, which is why I run the Anti-Tinkercast 45 minutes before kickoff every single Sunday of NFL season right on Twitch. There is a link right down below in the pinned comment. Go follow on Twitch, and I will see you hopefully on Sunday morning, where I basically take questions from the chat for the final 45 minutes right before lock. So this slate, to me, in week 15, feels a lot more like a week 17 slate than a week 15 slate. And if you've played daily fantasy before, you kind of understand what I mean when I say that. What I'm getting at is there is so much value out there because so many players are hurt. This year has been really a statistical anomaly in terms of how many players have been injured. Not just quarterbacks, wide receivers. We have teams that are down to like 1 and 2 wide receivers, which is forcing some practice squad level players into full-time roles, playing 85 to 95% of snaps. They're not, let's say, NFL starter quality athletes, but they have been forced into NFL starter positions right now, and they're getting the opportunity. And opportunity trumps talent when it comes to fantasy scoring and daily fantasy specifically, because players are priced for what their role is expected to be. And then in situations where injury forces them into a new role, they are not priced up for that. This is very much like an NBA slate. There's a ton of value, mostly at the wide receiver position. And it's making this one a very, very, very cool tournament slate for me, where I think that we can fit all the players that we want into lineups around the core of superstars or stud players or great mid-range values or high price values that we want. So it is a very cool week. It's a very fun week. Let's bring in the chat and let's see what they have to throw at me this week, and let's see what questions they have. Jameis is good to go. Okay, well, that's good to know, because that brings in a few things. That brings in the Lions defense, because Jameis does turn the ball over a ton. It also brings in Godwin into play. And then we have to worry about their wide receiver situation, right? Because this is something that I don't have an answer for right now. Where we sit on Friday when I'm recording this, we know that Mike Evans, it says doubtful. I'm not expecting him to play, so let's work under the assumption that he's not going to play this weekend. Godwin is going to get his usual role and maybe bumped up a little bit. So his usual role is about 25% of the market share of targets for the Buccaneers. And that leads him to having a really solid floor, 15, 16, 13, 13, with a ceiling if he gets into the end zone or catches a long one, which he definitely has in his arsenal, of having a 35 to a 40-point ceiling. But Mike Evans also gets 25% of the targets, and that's going to bring in a couple of other players. Somebody like Brett Perriman, who has played a solid amount, has a good floor, but is 4,500. I think that there's better plays in that 4 to 5K range, but Perriman is still solid. And then early in the week, I thought that Justin Watson might be the guy because Miller was injured, but now Miller is back and he has played more snaps than Watson when both have been healthy all season long. So right now, I think that Miller might be the better play than Watson, but there's so many plays at wide receiver that are sub 4K that I don't think either of them are core value plays for me, at least not at this point. And that also opens up somebody like OJ Howard. I know I just vomited a little bit in my mouth too when I brought up his name for DFS purposes. Obviously, I think the kid is a great talent. I think that he is a physical specimen. I think that in the right offense and in the right utilization, he could be a fantasy superstar. But the way that he's being rolled out on this team, he has not been one, though he does have 11 targets the last couple of weeks. He definitely has big playability at the tight end, which not all tight ends have. But I'm never thrilled to play him this year because of the way he's being utilized. The Slay shadow into the slot, not from what I know, but like it really hasn't mattered this year. He hasn't been all that great. So like Detroit's giving up an absolute metric ton of points to basically everything. Running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, they just haven't been good defensively this year. So I'm not really fading anybody on that team, or against that team defensively, just because, well, this guy with a name who's been good in the past is going to be defending him. Slay has not been great defensively, has not stopped anybody else. Has really not turned into the shadow corner or the guy that we had to avoid in years past. That's just not who he's been right now. Is Slayton a smash value play for me this weekend? I think he's a good value, but I think there's a lot of value. I don't think that we have to look at one guy, right? Like most weeks, we look at the value plays at wide receiver and we see like one guy or two guys. I think there's a ton, right? Like at wide receiver, there's more value than I think we've seen in a really, really long time. So let's just look at 5K and below. All right. Just 5K and below. Darius Slayton's too cheap. There, I said it. He's got 39 targets the last 4 games that the Giants have played, and he's 4,700. That is just way too much volume for the salary, right? 9 targets a game should be like 6K, but he's 4,700. So he's too cheap. Allen Hurns pressed into a bigger role offensively because of all the injuries, and if Devontae Parker is out this weekend, he remains with that role. He's too cheap. D.D. Westbrook with DJ Shark available was going to be a very good value this week going against Oakland, who is terrible at defending the pass, right? And now DJ Shark might miss, which is going to open up even more value in somebody like Chris Conley, who now doesn't have to fight Shark for as many targets and is 3,600. Keelan Cole is going to play a lot more snaps in the case that Shark is out. This is news that we're waiting for. So these are your if-then statements that you have to think about at 3K, right? So we have multiple 3K guys. We talked about Miller, just mentioned him, just mentioned Keelan Cole at 3K with the amount of run he's going to get against Oakland's porous secondary as a guy with an uptick. And everybody's going to say, well, he only had this. Stop already. Just stop. Greg Ward is another 3K guy that we're going to have to monitor because there's just no wide receivers left for Philly, and he's playing all the snaps. So if somebody's playing all the snaps, I don't care what his level of talent is. The last 3 weeks, 7 targets, 3 targets against Miami when they had more players available. And now with Alshon Jeffrey out and Aguilar possibly out, Greg Ward could play the same complement of snaps that he played against the Giants on Monday night against Washington that can't really defend, and he's minimum salary. So you're telling me I could get 6 to 10 targets for somebody like this, or Conley, or War, or any of the other receivers that are 4K and below. There's just an avalanche of value at the cheap range this week. Kupp or Woods is playing more snaps, so I want the guy that's on the field. As much as I love Cooper Kupp and his skill set and what he does, Woods is a guy who's playing a lot more snaps. Thoughts on stacking the Chargers? Rivers and his pass catchers are somewhat cheap and will presumably have low ownership. Yes, but it's also dangerous, right? I think that there's tournament upside there. I agree with the way that you're phrasing that, right? Because looking at their flex players, They have a lot of guys, and we talk, a lot of mouths to feed is something that we say often because it can eat into market shares, right? So you've got somebody like Austin Eckler, who isn't seeing a ton of looks, but is a very explosive player, right? He got 12 touches last week and had 37 DraftKings points. That's absurd, right? 12 touches is not a lot. But he is somebody who is out there. Melvin Gordon III, getting a good amount of volume. 17 touches last week in a game that he sat in the fourth quarter, 19 points. Keenan Allen, we know what he can do. We've seen him range from 4 targets up to 12. So this is a problem for me that he's not getting the usage that we're used to from him. Hunter Henry, we've seen him range from 3 and 4 targets up to 10. Mike Williams, we've seen him get as many as 7 or 8 targets, 10, 13 in these weeks against Pittsburgh and Denver, and we've seen him get as low as 3. So the problem isn't the talent for Phillip Rivers. It's identifying which one is going to get, or which 2 are going to get the most usage. So stacking the Chargers is a problem because we don't know where the usage is going to go. But if you hit on it, right? If you nail that usage for that 1 week, you do put yourself in a position to win a tournament. We all hate him, but does Sony Michel have a good game against Cincinnati? I mean, maybe. I can't try to predict. It's very hard for me to predict when Sony Michel is going to have a 100-yard, 2-touchdown performance, right? And I feel like we're just kind of trying to create something that hasn't really been there this year, right? He had 3 touchdowns this week on 19 carries against the Jets, 42, right? And Cincinnati's been real bad against running backs on the season. Cincinnati, where are they? 2, 4, 6, 8th most DraftKings points against opposing running backs, 27 per game, 115 yards per game to opposing running backs, 5 catches per game to opposing running backs. Great. The problem is Sony Michel's not playing snaps. James White is the one seeing the most predictable usage, right? And you know what his usage is going to be from 1 week to the next. You also know that Rex Burkhead's going to play some snaps, got 7 carries last week. You know that Brandon Bolden's going to get something, and he, on his 1 touch last week, he vultured a touchdown. So the roles aren't as defined for these other 3 running backs not named James White. Is Mixon playable? Mixon's been playable for the last 5-6 weeks. Now he draws a really tough defense. They just don't have anything else that they can do offensively. So they're just force feeding him the ball. The best thing is that these targets have kind of escalated, right? He had the 1 really bad week, but like this is a good amount of targets, right? 3-4 targets is solid for a running back. And he's getting they're just pounding him on the ground. I just don't know how efficient they're going to be. Now his price has climbed to a point. It's over 6K as opposed to back here when it was like 4K to 55 or 5,800. Now it's getting to a point where you're reaching into much better plays. He's more expensive than Todd Gurley, who, Gurley's seen a good amount of usage recently. Gurley for the past few weeks, 27 touches, 20 touches. Sure, against Baltimore where they got blown out. He didn't get a lot of touches. I get it. 28 touches against Chicago. If he's getting 20 to 30 touches again, Todd Gurley at 6K is absolutely too cheap. It's hard to fail when you get 25 touches as a running back, with some of those coming in the passing game, which is something that the Rams did not do earlier in this season, right? When you've got that sort of usage and you're getting that sort of carries, he rushed 23 times for 79 yards and a touchdown with 34 more receiving yards. This is the Todd Gurley that we've seen the last 2 years. So if that's the Todd Gurley that we're going back to, then great, sign me up. Are we going to attack this Atlanta game through the air for the 49ers or on the ground? Both. They have the highest team total on the slate. You know, they've definitely got the highest team total on the slate at what? 29, I think it was. So like guys like Mostert are in really great spots, right? Guys like Mostert sitting at like 5,200. I understand that it's a leap of faith. I understand that people are a little bit scared about his usage and that it's not going to be where they might think that it should be. I think that it's going to be fine. I believe that he's going to get 15 plus touches this week. He had 21 2 weeks ago against Baltimore in a loss. He had 12 last week in a game where they were, just kind of messing around and floundering, but not messing around and floundering, but like in a game where they had to throw it a lot. This game, they may not have to based on game script, because they're not just going to lean on the run, and running on the road is different from running as a home favored team that expects to be in a positive game script situation. And you've got situations there that I think lean towards Raheem Mostert being extremely successful, right? So the 49ers have done a really good job of keeping him from first contact, let's say, right? So when you've got him sitting on a situation where he's not getting touched for 4 yards, right? He's not seeing first contact until 4 yards past the line of scrimmage. And now you've got a matchup with Atlanta where I want to get the stat right, so I'm trying to find it. So Mostert 4.8 yards before first contact over the last 2 weeks. And since week 4, Atlanta's allowing the 6th most yards per carry after first contact. And you're telling me that they're not going to get to touch him until he's 4 or 5 yards downfield. And they're not very good at tackling Atlanta, right? They're allowing a lot of yards after first contact. And now you're getting a guy that's going to run into your secondary because his offensive line is doing that good. And they're expected to win this game and play from ahead in this game, which to me means Mostert at 5,200 is a value that is not going to be very highly owned and definitely has touchdown and multiple touchdown upside with where their total is. And I think that the passing game is also going to be extremely solid in this game for the simple fact that Jimmy Garoppolo has had big games and small games, right? He's been up and down. He's been a roller coaster for us in terms of fantasy, but we know that he's got this 30 plus point ceiling that he's hit 3 separate times this year. And in this game where they've got a really high total against a team that does not look to be able to do things that would force Jimmy G into spots where he can't operate the way he wants to operate, now you've got a spot where he's dangerous, right? Because Atlanta's only creating pressure at about 20% of the time on opposing quarterbacks. The lowest pressure percentage in the league on this season. They just do not get into the opposing backfield. They do not force teams and quarterbacks to face a lot of pressure. Well, guess what? Jimmy G is averaging 46.2 more yards per attempt when he is not pressured as opposed to when he is. There's some quarterbacks that get pressured and they immediately hot route and they go deep, right? They find and attack the pressure deep when they get it. Jimmy G is not that guy. When he gets it, he dumps off. And this team is not going to do that. So he's got an opportunity to actually stretch the field a little bit. And his passer rating nearly doubles when he's not pressured, which is a situation that he should be in more often than not. He has a passer rating of 114.1 when he does not face pressure, as opposed to a passer rating of 57.5 when he is. So while Atlanta may want to get pressure on him, it's not something that they've done outside of maybe 2 weeks this season. And those 2 weeks we were all left scratching our head. So I think that both the running game and the passing game can eat in this situation. If they get the lead with the passing game, then the running game will come on strong in the second half. If they develop a large lead in the first half, though, due to defense and the running game, then that could sink Jimmy Garoppolo. But with a team total of 29, they're expecting them to score about 30 points. If there's 4 touchdowns scored by this offense, 1 or 2 of them by the running backs, and then 1 or 2 or 3 of them by Jimmy Garoppolo, it could be a situation where both the running backs and the quarterbacks and wide receivers all eat. Chark officially out. Good. I mean, I don't want to see anybody injured, but at least we have some clarity. I also saw something that said in the chat earlier that said, what was it? Mike Evans also ruled out. Some of this news always comes in during our show here on Friday. So I'm glad that we're getting a little bit of it, at least now. So now we have a little bit of a cleaner picture of where the value is going to lie. Mentioned this is a good week for tournaments. Can I expand on that? Yeah, there's a lot of plays that look like positively graded plays from a salary perspective, right? We have a lot of value plays at a lot of different positions. So looking at running back, we've got Christian McCaffrey, who you guys know how I feel about Christian McCaffrey. Dalvin Cook, not as much, but I think he's fine. Derrick Henry, not as much, but I think he's fine. Coming down to this range, Saquon Barkley is probably, in whatever projection system you use, is probably popping as one of the best value plays on the slate. For good reason. He's playing Miami, and they suck. Not much analysis really needed there. Most players that have played against Miami, or Miami has allowed a lot of players that have played them to have their highest outputs on the season, at least relative to the average output. So having a guy like Saquon Barkley, who has relied in the past so much on big plays, but has not produced those this year, should see more trips to the red zone, where he does get a lot of the red zone touches and red zone targets on this team. So there's more touchdown equity in Saquon Barkley with a solid floor of usage. He's had 20 touches last week, 22 the week before, 19 the week before that, 18 the week before that, for a bad team. So we know that the usage is going to be there, and now against a team that's allowing players to be more efficient against them. We also have Leonard Fournette at 7,600 against Oakland, and Oakland is quite bad. No matter how bad the Jaguars are, they just keep feeding the ball to Leonard Fournette. 18 touches, 23 touches, 33 touches, 15 with 7 of them coming in the passing game. We've seen monster volume games from Fournette and the Jaguars. He's only 7,600. 7,500, Chris Carson, one of my favorite plays on the slate, because I think we see a return to this level of volume from Chris Carson when favored on the road against Cleveland. 28 touches with 4 of them in the passing game, 22 touches with 4 of them in the passing game. 26 touches with 4 of those coming in the passing game at Arizona. They're at Carolina and favored. Carolina has allowed over 120 yards rushing to opposing running backs on the season, and in the last 4 weeks, about 144 yards rushing to opposing running backs. They've been really, really bad. And now you're telling me that he should see more volume now, because Rashard Penny had been eating into what his usage was the past few weeks, and now Rashard Penny is out, which leaves Chris Carson to not get every single touch. No running back except for Christian McCaffrey gets like 99% of the running back touches, but if he gets 80 to 85% of the running back touches for a team that wants to run the ball and wants to get the ball to their running backs, and now against a team that can't stop opposing running backs in a favored game script situation, at 7,500 he's too cheap. So you're gonna have a lot of money to spend without even getting to the massive values that are out there, right? There's still value at the running back spot. I mentioned Mostert. Patrick Laird is a good value at running back. You got all those super value plays at wide receiver that we talked about, from 5K down to the absolute stone minimum of 3K. We've got good value tight ends, which to me means you can plug in, let's say you go Barkley, Carson, let's not go with 2 giants. Let's go with Ward here, right? We got Ward. And now you can do whatever you want from a tournament perspective, right? I said plug in your core and cycle your core through a bunch of lineups. You have 5,300 plus a defense, right? I think that they're going to be the most owned defense this week, more than likely. So 5,900 remaining, 29,000 for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spots. You can play whatever tournament tactic you want. You can go quarterback with a single stack, quarterback with a double stack. You can bring it back with 1 or 2 players on the other team and do whatever the hell it is that you want to do So this week is more about getting your attacks right. Yeah, and somebody just mentioned it in chat. Jay-Shan just nailed it in chat. So there's another value that we're waiting on, and I hadn't mentioned him yet. But Josh Jacobs is questionable. We don't know if he's going to play. We may not get this news before lock. We didn't get it last week before lock, and we may not get it this week before lock because the Raiders play in that 4 p.m. game, 4:05, which means they don't have to announce their inactives until 90 minutes before kickoff. So if Josh Jacobs is inactive in this game, now we have a situation, once again, where Washington is going to be probably the best value on the slate from a points per dollar perspective, considering the matchup, considering that they're playing at home and favored, considering how much the Raiders want to lean on their lead running back, and Washington is their lead running back in the case that Jacobs is out. That puts him in a situation where he's going to get 15 to 25 touches. I know that's a really wide range of touches, but I'm giving myself a little bit of wiggle room in the case that Jacobs is out for only 4,700. I think he's a much better value play than Laird. In the case that both of them are going to be the top guy. So you're going to want to leave yourself wiggle room with late swap possibilities, because if we don't have that news before lock, Dwayne Washington's not going to be really highly owned. So there's another value with waiting out there. So you can basically do whatever you want for GPP, and a lot of people aren't taking advantage of late swap on DraftKings. So if you're somebody who is willing to sit there and do the work and have your if-then lineups built with that late swap possibility in flex, right? Because there's a bunch of guys that you can get to at that 5,000 range that are playing in the afternoon, right? So let's just highlight those games. We highlight this game, this game, this game, this game, this game, right? Here's all the late games. So if you want to have the possibility to get to Washington in your flex, you got to leave 4,700. Which means that we've got to look at guys from here down. Guys like maybe Austin Hooper in your flex, who's a solid play. Terrell Williams, who's got big playability against Jacksonville, though he doesn't see an absolute metric ton of targets. He is a big target for them around the red zone and in the end zone, and sees a lot of downfield looks as well. D.D. Westbrook, 4,600. As long as you leave that one more 100 in your flex, you can pivot off of Westbrook and on to Washington in that case. Same thing for Mike Williams. There's plenty of guys on this slate that you could plug into the flex to give you that safe play and also give you the opportunity to pivot to somebody like Washington, right? These are all positive value plays, positive EV plays from a salary perspective with their current projection. Or you make a 2v2 swap where if Jacobs is out, I'm going to change these two players to this as long as it adds up to that. So 2v2 swap would be, you know, if you want to go with maybe Conley and somebody else and then have it add up to that, so you can swap out two late players for those other guys. So there's a lot of ways to do it. Chat just informed me that we have another piece of news that just broke for Carolina. And now I've just got games that are all over the board. Give me a second to X these guys out. Another piece of news just hit for Carolina. Greg Olsen is out, which basically means that Ian Thomas is too cheap. Forget it. I'm not even going to look for it. Greg Olsen has now been ruled out. So that means, you know what that means. That means that now Ian Thomas, who ran a really good amount of routes last week per drop back, saw 10 targets. I'm not expecting 10 targets again against Seattle, but Seattle has been very bad against opposing tight ends. They've been one of the teams that we have streamed tight ends against all year long because they've allowed such great efficiency when quarterbacks throw to tight ends against them. They don't allow as many touchdowns as a team like Arizona has allowed, but they're one of the teams that we target with opposing tight ends. And now you've got a path to snaps, routes run, and targets for a guy like Ian Thomas. If he sees 6 or 7 targets against this Seattle team with Greg Olsen out, now you've got a pathway at 3,100 to just another value play. There is enough money on this slate to do whatever you want. This is just kind of what this week's slate is. It's shaping up to be a very week 17-ish slate. So we're going to have to be very mindful of what happens around inactives this weekend. You're going to have to be mindful because there are a lot of late games for us to be able to set up pivots to. And we're getting so many injury reports. Chark out as well. All right. Well, now we know what that is. At least we talked about that earlier on the show. So with Chark out, now Dede Westbrook becomes one of the better value plays. With he was already popping as a great value play. Now with Chark out, he's an even better value play. Chris Conley maybe becomes the top value play at wide receiver at 3,600, and Keelan Cole becomes a viable play, more tournament oriented for me. I'd rather have somebody like Greg Ward if we're playing a 3K wide receiver, but he is also in play. Last week was injury apocalypse. I don't disagree. Conley and Gallup or Ward and Debo. I don't know. I usually do the 1v1s and 2v2s on Sunday morning because like you don't need to lock in a lineup on Friday afternoon, but like we can talk about it. So like I think that if you're from a tournament perspective, what are you doing with Gallup or Debo? Because I'm fine with both, and I think that both are okay, but it's more to me about how you're building that lineup, right? So what are you trying to do with that lineup? Because like if it's a Dak lineup, if you're trying to do this for tournament, both are fine for tournaments and both have ceiling possibilities. So if you've got Dak, Conley, Gallup, let's say you're bringing it back with maybe Woods, right? This is how this lineup is going to look, right? And you've still got 5,600 as opposed to building that lineup differently, because we're looking to try to get 225 points out of this lineup, right? We've got Debo, Garoppolo. Let's say we bring this back with Hooper at tight end, Greg Ward, Debo Samuel. And it depends on what you're really trying to tell with this lineup. This lineup's got a little bit more salary flexibility. Maybe you throw Julio in this lineup too if you want. Depends on how you feel. Is Julio viable for cash? Okay, so head-to-heads this week, I think is a different type of build. I think it's back to your standard build, right? I think this week, I think that the standard build is going to be more along the lines of a value wide receiver, maybe a second value wide receiver. Boom. Probably boom. And also probably boom. Maybe one of these guys becomes a cheaper third running back, right? Maybe it's McCaffrey, Barkley, and, Laird, or McCaffrey, Barkley, and Washington, or McCaffrey, Barkley, and Mostert. Fine. But let's say you plug these three guys in. Can you build a lineup with this? Yeah, I think you can. Right? You could plug in Ian Thomas. You could plug in Higbee at tight end if you want to get two guys that are under 4K. That leaves you with 5K. Pick a quarterback. I don't care. Defense, we talked about the Lions. I think that this is your standard cash game build with 6,400 remaining. Right? Like this is not a difficult week, guys. It really isn't. It's not a difficult week to build lineups. Like in terms of cash game, I think that that's the way that you're going to get the most volume and targets for your wide receivers and upside from your wide receivers. Flowchart this week and Njoku are too risky. I think we're in the same situation that we were last week, right? When my advice was, yes, the Cardinals are terrible against tight ends. And also, yes, Vance McDonald does not run a ton of routes and does not get a ton of targets and is not as an important part of his offense where they're going to completely change everything that they do and run things through David Njoku, just like they weren't going to run things through Vance McDonald last week. For me, the most telling stats in this situation, and I mentioned how Jarvis Landry was the guy that I prefer at wide receiver for those guys. Arizona is the second worst third down defense in the league this year. Who gets the ball on third down for the Cleveland Browns? It's Jarvis Landry. 4 straight games with multiple third down catches, tied with Cooper Kupp for the longest active streak in the NFL. Arizona's allowing a league high 4.2 red zone targets per game, right? That's a lot. I hadn't pulled this up yet, so let's just go here. NFL Savant, very easy viz for you guys. Free site. Total targets, it's basically Odell and Jarvis Landry, right? 26 and 26% of the target market share. So they get into the red zone a ton against the Arizona Cardinals. You're going to say, okay, well, who do I pick? Jarvis Landry or Odell Beckham? Well, let's look at the end zone and red zone targets. Jarvis Landry has more red zone completions than Odell Beckham Jr. has red zone targets on the year. 29% is an absurdly high red zone target rate. So if they're going to get into the red zone over 4 times this weekend, give me the guy. Yeah, sure. Njoku might score a touchdown, or Hunt might score a touchdown, or Chubb might score a touchdown, or Beckham might score a touchdown. They might. But the highest percentage chance guy to get targeted in the red zone and get targeted in the end zone and have that have the most touchdown equity of all the Cleveland players is right there with Jarvis Landry, and he's sub 7K against a team that's going to let them into the red zone more times than any other team in the league. Now, does that mean that he's a lock? No. Right? Am I guaranteeing you a touchdown for Jarvis Landry? Hell no. And if somebody else scores a touchdown out of that group, should you at me and said, well, you said they couldn't? No, you shouldn't. But from a percentage chance perspective, which is what we look at, right? I don't have a crystal ball. I can't see into the future. I don't know what Freddie Kitchens is going to call when they get inside the 10-yard line, but I can tell you what he has called for the majority of this season, and what he has called is Jarvis Landry's number. So that's my favorite Browns play this weekend. You feel like Njoku could see 6 catches and a touchdown? Sure, he could. What percent chance do you think that happens? A lot of things can happen, but I can't, it's football. Things happen, right? Random stuff happens. Njoku could also catch a touchdown and have 2 targets, right? He could have 1 catch for 8 yards and a touchdown for 4.3K. I'd much rather have, right, based on volume and everything else at tight end, with where Njoku is priced, right? He's priced up here now because of the matchup. They've been very aggressive at pricing these guys up. Njoku is a $3,000 player right now. He's a 3K player, right? 1 week removed from a long injury, a 3-month injury, and now he's 4,200, bumped up 20% because of the matchup. So for me, Gesicki against the Giants is a better play at 4K. Higbee is a much better play at 3,900 with the ridiculous 25 targets that he's seen over the last 3 weeks with Everett being injured. He's also leading the league in terms of red zone and end zone looks over the last 3 weeks in an offense that does project to score a lot of points in a game that is one of the most likely to turn into a shootout. Tyler Higbee is a very real piece of this offense, especially with them running more 2 tight end sets and Cooper Kupp sitting a little bit more. Higbee's a weapon right now. And we just got the news with Ian Thomas against a team that, while hasn't allowed as many tight end points to opposing tight ends as Arizona, he's $1,200 cheaper for Ian Thomas and projected to get way more volume in the passing game. Much higher floor for Ian Thomas on raw projection, right? Ian Thomas has a higher, think about this. Ian Thomas has a much higher raw projection than does David Njoku. And he's $1,200 cheaper. Njoku's price is just egregious this week. How many tight ends do I use in my pool? I mean, everybody's different, right? So like what works for me or what I like to do or what has worked historically for me may not be what works historically for somebody else. I know that we talked with Maki Supa earlier this week on the cage match, right? And he basically said, I play 1 or 2 quarterbacks. Like he plays 1 quarterback across his 150 most weeks. That's not me. He's a very successful player. I've been a very successful player over the last 8 years as well. I play about between 7 and 10 quarterbacks on a given week, right? Out of the 26 that are available, right? There's 13 games this week. There's 26 quarterbacks. I focus on about 8 of them, maybe 10 of them. and I don't really overweight quarterback because I think that quarterback ownership is somewhat irrelevant because no quarterback is ever really over 20%. And they all have this very narrow band of scoring. So I want to capture, when I'm playing quarterbacks, for the most part, I'm playing them to have stacks, bringbacks, double stacks, all that sort of stuff to try and put myself in a position to win a tournament in the case that that quarterback has a monster day where I capture the quarterback, his pass catcher or pass catchers, and somebody else who's doing well on the other team to force them to keep, that's the bring back player, to force that team to keep their foot on the throttle. So like both of them, both sides of that equation do very well, right? Like we saw a couple weeks ago with the Eagles against Miami when Alshon had a big day and Parker had a big day and Fitzmagic had a big day. You get both teams coming back and forth at each other and scoring a lot of touchdowns. You want to capture all of that. Then you cycle your stuff, your core players through the rest of those lineups. So tight end is a very touchdown oriented position, a very touchdown dominant position, very touchdown dependent position. So I tend to focus on the high volume tight ends, which means that my tight end pool is smaller than most other people. I tend to play maybe 5 or 6 tight ends at most on a week. And I'm sure that there's other players that play 10 and 12 tight ends on a week, but I have a very consolidated pool of tight end players. Double tight end viable in cash this week? I don't think so. I think that this is a week where you want to eliminate that. Like I don't want any double tight end lineups this week. I don't think you need it. Conjurian GPP will be paying up at wide receiver and playing. Yeah. And that's the thing. So we went over that one lineup, right? Where you can stuff in all this volume at running back at the high price. And then you're forcing yourself into cheap wide receivers, which is what I think most people are going to do this week, right? So you nailed it. So people always ask, how can you be contrarian? How do I play a differentiated lineup than other people? It's not hard. If you think the majority of people are going to play value wide receivers, spend up at wide receiver. It's not hard. If you think most people are going to pay up for McCaffrey, Henry, Barkley, Fournette, Carson, and have at least 2 of these in your lineups, don't have any more than 1. Build lineups that don't have more than 1 of them or any of them in a lineup and try and get there with mid-range guys like Drake, like Mostert, like Laird, right? Or set yourself up for late swap with Washington in case we don't get the news on Jacobs. Because last week, Washington was what? Sub 2% owned, sub 1% owned. Because most people who play this game on the GPP level are not thinking that far ahead, right? They're not saying, well, if Jacobs is out, Washington's going to be the play. And I'm going to set myself up for it right now. Most people want to play the safe play and go relax on their Sunday and watch football. They're not sitting there waiting to grind late swap. And that's some way that you can definitely take advantage and get some leverage on the field by setting yourself up with maybe 15 or 20% of your lineups in case Jacobs is out, that you've got Washington in there, or at least a pivot to get to Washington in there with global swap or something else. And then guess what? Now you can pay up at tight end where most people aren't going to pay up at tight end for somebody like Ertz or Kittle or Kelsey. You can pay up at wide receiver for guys like Hopkins or Godwin or Tyreek or Galladay, right? You can build lineups with these guys. You can build lineups with one of the expensive tight ends like Kittle, and you still have 4,600. And you've got a vastly different lineup for tournaments than most other people do, just by doing the opposite. Just because the standard lineup build is one way doesn't mean that you can't have success building it another way. Or you can do a balanced build this week instead of starts and scrubs. Exactly. That's why I said this week is great for GPPs, because there's so many different ways that you can build plus EV lineups, where you're not taking a chance. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, where the salaries were really, really ratcheted up and tight, where that last one and maybe two spots in your lineup were going to make you a little bit uncomfortable. Oh God, I've got this guy in my lineup and I don't like him. There's ways to build lineups this week that are different from the norm, where you choose that other path and you get differentiated a little bit, and every spot in the lineup still is a plus EV play. Those weeks don't happen that often. Is anyone else on Gurley this week? I think he's a good tournament play. I do. He's 6K and he's seen 25 plus touches 3 of the last 4 weeks. Don't quote me. It might be 2 of the last 4 weeks, and 1 was close. But that's a lot of volume for 6K. Play Boston Scott and the rest follows. That's an issue for me. You know, Boston Scott had a great game on national TV in a spot where the lead running back got hurt and cramped. Now, he may earn more touches and earn more snaps, but I don't think there's any path without an injury to Miles Sanders for him to have 16 touches against Washington. Now, if he gets 16 touches at 3K, he's a must play. I don't see very many paths to 16 touches. I think he sees more like 7 touches, right? Which would be what? The second most, tied for the second most he's had this season in all the other games. He's a wee lad. He's a very small dude. He can't really handle getting 15 to 20 touches every single week. I think they might, based on the injuries that they have, try to scheme to get him between 5 and 10 touches this week, which at 3K is highly variant, especially with as many other high volume guys at cheap prices as there are. Thomas and 1 value wide receiver, enough to make lineups. Thomas and value mid-range, high volume running backs, any lineup you want. Exactly, Jay Shan. And that's why I think that this is a great tournament week. Can we talk about a Houston Tennessee stack? Yeah, just play all the dudes, right? If you want to stack a game, just play all the dudes from that lineup. It's not that hard, right? If you think that a game is going to shoot out, if you think that a game, and this is one of the games that is extremely likely to shoot out, like of the 3 or 4 games that I have targeted as possibly the games that might shoot out the most, right? Or have the highest chance to shoot out. You play whichever quarterback you want. Henry, if he's healthy, if you think he's going to see the amount of volume that he's seen, you plug him into the lineup. You plug Hopkins into the lineup. Probably going to have him. Not going to play either of the tight ends. And then you stack either one of the QBs. Right? There's your tournament shell. 4,100. Can you make this lineup work? Do we have any sub 4K wide receivers? I think we do. Do we have any sub 3K tight ends? Yeah, I think so. Can we fit another wide receiver or a running back in there and another flex play in there with a cheap defense? Yeah, I think we can. Not that hard to get there. That's why I love this week. You can do basically anything that you want. It's up to you. And I will be back on Sunday morning, 45 minutes before kickoff, to take all of your lineup questions that you can throw at me while I try not to tinker with my lineups. But this is a very fun week, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you guys for joining once again. Drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notifications bell. And I will see you 45 minutes before lock on twitch.tv/al_smizzle. Links down below. Go drop a follow. Okay.
He's a legend.